Former CIA Director John Brennan has officially had his clearances revoked, according to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. We're going to take you there live.
Any professional courtesy that may have been due to him. Mr. Brennan has a history that calls into question his objectivity and credibility. In 2014, for example, he denied to Congress that CIA officials under his supervision had improperly accessed the computer files of congressional staffers. He told the Council of Foreign Relations that the CIA would never do such a thing. The CIA's Inspector General, however, contradicted Mr. Brennan directly, concluding unequivocally that agency officials had indeed improperly accessed congressional staffers' files. More recently, Mr. Brennan told Congress that the intelligence community did not make use of the so-called Steele dossier in an assessment regarding the 2016 election, an assertion contradicted by at least two other senior officials in the intelligence community and all of the facts. Additionally, Mr. Brennan has recently leveraged his status as a former high-ranking official with access to highly sensitive information to make a series of unfounded and outrageous allegations, wild outbursts on the internet and television about this administration. Mr. Brennan's line and recent conduct, characterized by increasingly frenzied commentary, is wholly inconsistent with access to the nation's most closely held secrets and facilities, the very aim of our adversaries, which is to sow division and chaos. More broadly, the issue of Mr. Brennan's security clearance raises larger questions about the practice of former officials maintaining access to our nation's most sensitive secrets long after their time in government has ended. Such access is particularly inappropriate when former officials have transitioned into highly partisan positions and seek to use real or perceived access to sensitive information to validate their political attacks. Any access granted to our nation's secrets should be in furtherance of national, not personal interest. For this reason, I've also begun to review the more general question of the access to classified information by government officials. As part of this review, I am evaluating action with respect to the following individuals: James Clapper, James Comey, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr. Security clearances for those who still have them may be revoked, and those who have already lost their security clearance may not be able to have it reinstated. It is for the foregoing reasons that I have exercised my constitutional authority to deny Mr. Brennan access to classified information, and I will direct appropriate staff of the National Security Council to make the necessary arrangements with the appropriate agencies to implement this determination. With that, I'll take your question. Jonathan.
Sarah, first I've got a question I wanted to ask you, but first just to follow up on that. It seems like everybody that you mentioned has been a political critic of the president. Is he going after his political opponents with this?
No, if there were others that weren't, that we deemed necessary, we would certainly take a look and review those as well.
Okay, I want to ask you about something the president's attorney said. Rudy Giuliani said of the special counsel Robert Mueller needs to write the damn report so we can see it and rebut it. And he said if it's not written within the next 2 or 3 weeks, quote, we will just unload on him like a ton of bricks. Is the president okay with his attorney threatening the special counsel in this way?
Certainly, we've made clear we'd like to see this wrap up. For questions specific about comments by Mr. Giuliani, I'd refer you back to him.
Was that authorized by the president?
Once again, for questions specific about the investigation, particularly comments from Rudy Giuliani, I'd refer you back to him to address those. Jeff?
Hey, Sarah. Following up on John's question, how is this announcement by the president, how can Americans not interpret that as a getting back against his critics? And isn't it also an attempt to curtail their freedom of speech by penalizing them for being critical on television?
Not at all. The president has a constitutional responsibility to protect classified information and who has access to it, and that's what he's doing, is fulfilling that responsibility in this action. This is action only specific to Mr. Brennan, and the others are currently under review.
Is this the kind of precedent he wants to set for future presidents when his administration is out of office? And why are there no Republicans on that list?
Once again, if we deemed it necessarily, we would certainly look into that and be happy to review those. Justin?
I wanted to ask about Turkey, but just to buttonhole on what Jeff said, I guess the reason people would say that this argument strains credibility is there's obvious examples even from this administration. Your former national security advisor has admitted to lying to the FBI. Why is this only a list of Democrats who have been critical of the administration, and why should Americans have confidence that you are taking this seriously if there's not a single Republican on that list?
Again, certainly we would look at those if we deemed it necessary, and we'll keep you posted if that list gets updated.
So on Turkey, Turkey announced today that they're going to slap tariffs on about $1 billion of American goods. So I'm wondering if you have a response to that, and if there's any discussion internally about retaliating towards that, continuing to escalate this.
Yeah, the tariffs from Turkey are certainly regrettable and a step in the wrong direction. The tariffs that the United States placed on Turkey were out of national security interest. Theirs are out of retaliation. I'm not going to get ahead of anything on what we may or may not do in an effort to respond, but certainly we don't support Turkey's decision to retaliate against us protecting our national security interest.
An appeals court in Turkey today denied Pastor Brunson's appeal to try to be released. Does the administration view that as a new setback, or as sort of maintaining the status quo?
We feel that Turkey, and specifically President Erdogan, have treated Pastor Brunson, who we know to be a very good person and a strong Christian who's done nothing wrong, very unfairly, very badly, and it's something that we won't forget in the administration. Let's move on. Jake, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. So the administration has put up a robust defense of Pastor Brunson, but at the same time, there are tens of thousands of Christians in North Korea who have been imprisoned almost exclusively because of their religion. Open Door USA considered North Korea to be the #1 country when it comes to persecution of the Christians. Is this something that the administration has also been looking into?
Certainly, we would like to see any individual persecuted for their Christian beliefs or imprisoned released. Again, we've been working with North Korea on a number of fronts. That's something we'd certainly like to see them change their behavior on. I know it's been discussed, and again, certainly something we'd like to see their behavior changed on. Sorry, Jake, I got to keep.
Just to follow up.
Go ahead.
Here's my question. Although territory held by ISIS has been reduced by over 90%, a recent UN report suggests that as many as 30,000 ISIS members still exist in Iraq and Syria. So, first of all, what's the administration's take on this specific UN report? And secondly, what would the administration consider an overall victory against ISIS?
We'd like to see every single member of ISIS defeated across the globe. I think that would be the ultimate victory. John, go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Closing arguments are taking place across the river in Alexandria for the tax fraud trial of Paul Manafort. And in mid-June, the president said that he felt badly for Mr. Manafort and that he believes he's being treated unfairly. Is the president still friends with Mr. Manafort? When was the last time you spoke with Mr. Manafort?
I'm not aware of any recent conversations that they've had. Blake?
I believe he's being treated unfairly.
I think that the president's made that clear in his previous comments. I don't have anything to add beyond that at this point. Blake, go ahead.
Sarah, thank you. You just said a couple minutes ago that the increased tariff levels with Turkey were out of the national security interest, but when the president announced it on Twitter last week or earlier this month, he said, quote, at the time, he said, "Our relations with Turkey are not good at this time." The suggestion there being that this has to do with the pastor that is being held in Turkey. Simply put, if Pastor Brunson is allowed to leave Turkey, do those tariff levels go away? Is that kind of the deal that could be in place?
No,
is that a deal that could be on the table?
The tariffs that are in place on steel would not be removed with the release of Pastor Brunson. The tariffs are specific to national security. The sanctions, however, that have been placed on Turkey are specific to Pastor Brunson and others that we feel are being held unfairly, and we would consider that at that point.
What, in the interest of national security, what's changed over the last month or so with Turkey that you're justifying national security?
Again, the president's been clear about the steel and aluminum industries, steel particularly in this case, that those are industries that must be protected. We must have the ability to reach certain levels of manufacturing of those products here in the United States for the purposes of national security. John?
Thank you, Sarah. I was going to ask about Turkey, but based on your opening statement, I have to point out that the attorneys for former Director Comey and former Deputy Director McCabe say that their passes were automatically demagnetized the day that they were separated from their offices. Two others, Mr. Clapper and General Hayden, have said they do not use the pass at all. And also, it's my understanding from an historical standpoint, this would be the first time the president himself removed the passes from anybody, that has normally been done by agency heads or immediate superiors to people. Have you considered all these things in the process you say you're going to prove?
Again, the other individuals, those are being reviewed, and that determination will be made at a later date. Those that have already been revoked, it would be for the purpose of reviewing whether or not they should be reinstated or not. Major.
Sir, just so I understand the standard that the president is applying, you outlined two areas of either contradictory or erroneous testimony from Brennan. Is that the only standard by which this administration is asserting he should have his security clearance revoked?
Again, I laid out the reasons in the opening statement, specific to Director Brennan.
Right.
The others are currently under review. I don't have any specifics on those at this point.
Is that the standard? If you give erroneous testimony, you say something you have to correct at a certain date in the future. If you work for this administration, for example, does that mean you could lose your security clearance?
My understanding is this is being looked at on a case-by-case basis, which is why each individual is being reviewed and determination made at that
Does this
point.
administration have any reason to believe or evidence to suggest Brennan has misused classified information or monetized his access to it, as was alleged earlier by this administration?
Again, I've laid out the reasons for the decision that was made on this specific instance. We'll continue to review the other actions. Andrew?
Can we assume by the absence of you not saying those things, you didn't find any evidence of that?
No, I wouldn't make any assumptions. I'm telling you what the decision was based off on in this case. Andrew?
Thank you very much. I wanted to follow up on the question yesterday about Afghanistan. Today there was another suicide attack in Kabul which killed 37 people in a school. A military base in the north has been overrun by the Taliban. They have also seized parts of the eastern provincial capital. Why do you think President Trump's strategy in Afghanistan is working?
As always, we're going to continue to review and look at the best ways to move forward. I'll leave it to the Department of Defense to get into specifics about tactical situations on the ground. What I can tell you is that we're committed to finding a political solution to end the conflict in Afghanistan. We're exploring all avenues for dialogue and close coordination with the Afghan government. We're going to continue to do that. If we have announcements or changes in the policy, we'll certainly let you know. Peter?
Follow up on the Turkey question, if I may. Have you guys assessed whether the liquidity situation in Turkey's financial sector is a risk in light of the fall of the lira? It's fallen like a quarter in the last 3 or 4 days.
Certainly, we're monitoring the situation with respect to the Turkish economy and the decline of the lira. But Turkey's economic problems, those are part of a long-term trend, something of its own making and not the result of any actions the United States has taken. Sarah?
Thank you, Sarah. One of the individuals that you listed on that list of clearance that is under review is Bruce Ord. He's a current employee of the Department of Justice. So instead of putting him under the review, does the president believe he should be fired?
I don't have any personnel announcements on that front. I can only speak to this specific case.
Why just put a security clearance under review, which would render him unable to do his job and not just fire him?
Once again, I don't have any personnel announcements on that front. I can just tell you we're looking into that specific matter. Peter, sorry, I called on you earlier.
Thank you, Sarah. If people who criticize the president publicly on TV or public in their criticisms, are they at greater risk of losing their security clearances than people who stay silent?
Once again, this is looked at on a case-by-case basis, and we'll do an individual review and make that determination. Kevin?
Thank you, Sarah. A question about the return of lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and then a follow-up very quickly. Now that they're back, can you sort of lay out the White House strategy for moving forward with this agenda? We've talked about wall funding. Obviously, a lot of people are very curious about the Kavanaugh nomination moving forward, DACA and other issues. Is there a strategy in place to begin the work with lawmakers now that they're back?
Certainly. We have continued ongoing conversations on a number of fronts with lawmakers, even while they were not here in Washington. We are happy that the hearing dates have been set for Justice Kavanaugh, and we look forward to seeing him get confirmed.
My very quick follow-up was, first of all, you didn't mention anything about a possible shutdown. Is that still something that the president is continuing? And my follow-up is going to be on the Farm Bill. There are a great number of people in a great number of states that are curious about this work requirement the USDA is trying to implement. In some places, they already have it. They say you have to work. In other areas, you don't have that requirement. Is that something the White House still supports?
Something we still support in terms of a shutdown. I don't have any announcements on that front. We certainly still want to see a lot of things happen. We'd love for Congress to actually do its job, particularly when it comes to immigration. We have a completely broken system, and we'd like to see them work with us to fix it. Catherine?
Thank you, Sarah.
I don't have any updates for you on that front right now. Okay. Catherine?
Omarosa Manigault Newman was the highest-ranking African-American staffer in the West Wing. No black.
She actually didn't work in the West Wing, but go ahead.
Well, no staffer has been appointed at that level since her absence. Can you tell us exactly how many African-American staffers there are in this building? And is it a priority for the administration to reflect the diversity of the country?
Certainly, as I addressed yesterday, we value diversity not just at the White House but throughout the entire administration, and we're going to continue trying to diversify the staff. We have a large number of diverse staffers from various backgrounds, both race, religion, gender.
How many staffers are there in this building?
Look, I'm not going to go through and do a count the same way I'm not going to do a sit down and count on the staffers that are in your news organizations.
13% of the country is African American.
And we would love to diversify our staff and continue to do so. We do think it's important. We're going to continue to work to make that happen. Raquel?
Sarah, thank you very much. About the election last night, we are seeing the Democrats embracing a more diversity, choosing Muslims, also candidates, transgender candidates, rejecting president's agenda. So my question is, what do you think will be the impact of his agenda and also these recent controversies about race and minorities on the election in November?
Again, I think people are looking at the policies that the individuals are implementing and how those are going to affect those communities and whether or not it's actually going to help individuals, people across this country. That's what we're looking at. That's what we're focused on. That's what we're going to continue to do. I'm going to take one last question. Eamon?
Thanks, Sarah. I'd like to ask you a couple questions about the president's recent comments, if I could. One is on Harley Davidson. The president commented earlier in the week, many Harley Davidson owners plan to boycott the company if manufacturing moves overseas. Great. Is the President of the United States endorsing a boycott of an iconic American company here?
Look, the President has made his feelings on that very clear. The President's focus is on making sure that we get good trade deals and that we keep business and industry here in the United States.
Does he want to see a boycott of Harley, though?
I think he'd rather see them put all their companies back here in the United States and build all of their great machines here in this country. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.
Did you authorize Mark Burnett to release any tapes he has, Sarah?
Well, if you are tired of hearing about Omarosa and those tapes, the White House dished out a whole new headline today talking about revoking the security clearances of former CIA Director John Brennan. And in addition to John Brennan, there are a host of others whose security clearance the White House is now under investigation, looking into whether they should revoke. Many of them, it is hard to ignore, are people who have been very critical of the President of the United States. And when asked why there are no Republicans on that list, the White House says this is a case-by-case basis. They are looking into it, and they will update the list as it warrants. And what was the standard exactly that the White House used to revoke the former CIA director's clearance? Sarah Huckabee Sanders said it was erratic conduct and behavior. I want to bring in Chief White House Correspondent Major Garrett. Major, what do you make of this?
Well, this was teed up a couple of weeks ago. It strikes me as significant that the one person named so far for a revocation of security clearance is the one member of the former national security and intelligence community apparatus to accuse the president of treason, which John Brennan did right after the Helsinki summit and press conference between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. It's also worth noting a couple of others names mentioned, Andrew McCabe, James Comey, have already had their security clearances revoked. It's a non-issue. James Clapper and Michael Hayden, both former senior executives within the intelligence community, have said they don't need it, don't use it, don't want it. So this seems to be focused on two people principally. One, a former member of the Obama administration, John Brennan, and one, a current member of the Justice Department, Bruce Orr, whom the president has very recently taken out against on Twitter. for his alleged malfeasance or incorrect handling of his responsibilities within the Justice Department related to the Hillary Clinton email investigation and other related matters. So if you sort of take a look at these names, separate the wheat from the chaff, you see around it a very definite political angle against John Brennan and against Bruce Orr. And then no explanation from the White House if someone who is currently serving in the Justice Department is under review for having their security clearance revoked. Why aren't they under some kind of special investigation and or fired? No explanation from the White House on that. So it seems much less oriented toward a personnel and security matter and much more reinforcing a political argument the president has recently launched against Orr.
Major, what about Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor who admitted lying to the FBI? What about his clearances?
Well, that's something that was not discussed here today, and I'm not quite sure exactly what it is, though as someone who has admitted lying to the FBI, I'm rather certain it is in some measure either under review or revoked or a non-issue. And that is something worth pointing out, that the handling of information, access to it, and truthfulness even within this own building has been a problem for this administration. So Michael Flynn is worth noting in any context talking about someone either mishandling or misusing their access to classified information.
You know, Major,
and it's also worth noting, Rena, when I asked Sarah Sanders specifically, do you have any evidence to suggest or prove that John Brennan has misused classified information or monetized his use of classified information? She did not say that there was. She didn't say absolutely they couldn't find it, but she did not lay that as an evidentiary justification for having his security clearance revoked.
Major, one of my favorite questions to you when translating Trump is, why now?
Why now? Is that the question,
Yes.
Rena? Why now?
Why now? Why now?
So, and I always have a hard time answering that question, Rena, in the sense of you have one aspect of this, which is very tough criticism of President Trump. And look, John Brennan, as a CIA director, former CIA director, does have an obligation, I think everyone in the intelligence community would agree, to choose his words carefully. To accuse the president of treason after a press conference is a heavyweight charge. And it is of a different level of intensity and velocity, if you will. No one else has used that terminology who had a position like John Brennan's, former CIA director. So there is this ongoing gripe the president has with criticism of that kind. As far as Bruce Orr, as I said a moment ago, he works in the Justice Department. The president has been recently implicating him, along with others he believes have misused their role or misused their influence within the FBI, and ought to have something done about that. To place his name on this list of reviewed security clearances seems to be largely in the arena of reinforcing that political argument carried out by the president on Twitter, and not something that you could and probably should handle administratively if you really did believe someone in a senior position at the Justice Department ought to have or should be investigated for having their security clearance revoked.
Very good point. Major Garrett, Chief White House Correspondent. Major, grateful you could join us to break this all down. I want to turn now and bring in CBS News senior national security analyst Fran Townsend for more. Fran, I just want to ask you this sort of idea of revoking clearance. First off, what kind of access, once you leave the White House, what are you entitled to, and what exactly are you able to glean when it comes to top secret and sensitive information?
Sure. Well, thank you for asking. Look, we should be honest about, a security clearance is a privilege. It's not a right. It's not a right when you're in government. It's not a right when you leave government. Typically, folks at a very senior level, whether it's the White House or agency heads, maintain these clearances after they leave in order to advise the White House. But sometimes those clearances are maintained because you have a consulting contract or you're working with a classified contractor in Washington. And so different people have different reasons for maintaining their clearance. regardless of your reasons for maintaining your clearance, you have an obligation to safeguard classified information. And if there's a concern about your ability to do that, there's usually an administrative process by which it's considered whether or not to revoke your clearance. It doesn't appear that any of that happened here. Frankly, it appears from the outside looking in that the president is angry with what John Brennan has had to say publicly, and including on Twitter. John has made very caustic, acerbic remarks and cast aspersions on the president, but he's got a perfect right to do that, to have an opinion about the president, and I think it seems the president is angry about that. You would hope that he wasn't using the security clearance process to penalize John or anyone else because he didn't like their opinions.
I want to ask you about that appearance that it seems that the president is penalizing his critics. What do you make of this announcement by the White House?
So, look, I think the press secretary said something to the effect that his comments were causing chaos within the administration. That's unfortunate, but that's not a violation of his oath in terms of keeping secret, classified information. And it's disturbing. I mean, I think that they're going to have to explain, how do they distinguish what John Brennan's doing versus General Mike Hayden, who also is a prior director of the CIA and has also been critical of the president. It's just not clear to me why John Brennan versus not others, what was the reason behind it, and whether or not there was any formal review process before revoking his clearance.
The White House says, Sarah Huckabee Sanders says, it was erratic conduct and behavior that led them to make this assessment. The fact that this really, I just don't remember from Bush, Clinton to this administration, Obama, ever. This is such a moment in national security and intelligence gathering. Is there any way for the intelligence and former intelligence officials like yourself who served in previous administrations to push back? Is there any pushback when the White House makes a decision like this?
Well, I don't think it's ever, to be quite frank, I don't know that it's ever happened before. And so I think people are going to have to think long and hard about, is there a way to have a public conversation about this? One, I think it is to the country's benefit to have John and others have their clearances and be available to the administration, even if they choose not to consult with folks. Because there's lots of day-to-day issues on which someone with John's experience, let's remember, before he was a political appointee in the Obama administration, John Brennan was a career intelligence officer. So he has decades of experience that might be useful not just to the heads of agencies, but to his former colleagues.
Yeah, it's certainly true. And, Fran, as you well know, so many former people continue to maintain relationships with other top-level intelligence, secret people in other countries. And what does it say to the credibility? What does it say to their profession after leaving the White House, after serving our countries for so long? Where do you see this headed at this point?
So this is why I say, I think both to our foreign allies who watch this from afar and wonder what this means, as well as to former national security officials here in the United States, it's bound to have a chilling effect. Regardless of whatever the reasons the White House states for revoking his clearance, everyone out there who's a former official with a security clearance, myself included, has to wonder whether or not if you say something critical, you're going to be the target of suspicion by the White House and put your clearance at risk. And so it's sort of deeply disturbing. Look, when you get a security clearance, you voluntarily give up certain aspects of your First Amendment right. I can't disclose publicly classified information. I voluntarily did that for the privilege of having my clearance. But that doesn't mean I'm not entitled to have an opinion about policy issues. And as you know, I'm off and on offering opinions about things that have nothing to do with classified information. And so it's sort of, we're in a country where we prize our First Amendment right, and we strike a balance in terms of our security clearances. I do think people will find this sort of punitive action to be disturbing and unsettling.
Disturbing, unsettling, and highly unusual. Fran Townsend, thank you so much for joining us. Grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Well, the jury in the Paul Manafort trial will soon begin deliberations. The prosecution has already finished its closing arguments, and the defense is set to finish theirs today. The president's former campaign chairman actually faces hundreds of years in prison if convicted on multiple charges of bank fraud and tax evasion. I want to turn now to CBS News Washington correspondent Paula Reed. She's outside the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Paula, how did the defense handle their closing arguments today?
It was interesting, Rita, because the defense had two themes. The first is that the government has failed to meet their burden of proof. They reminded the jury that the government has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, and they said, look, the government hasn't done that. That's the same thing they said yesterday when they decided not to put on a defense, not to call any of their own witnesses. One of Manafort's attorneys even came out yesterday and made a statement to the media despite a gag order. He said, look, the government hasn't presented a case. They haven't done their job. There is no viable prosecution here. Now,